Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in today. I'm so excited because we're getting closer and closer for Andrew Year Strong. Beyond that, I have an opportunity to really begin to talk to some of our guests and to get you just as excited as I am. And today we have our special guest. He's going to be one of our speakers and one of our presenters. He's going to be with us on the December the 14th to the 16th. And we have had him a couple of years now, and we invited him back just because of his sheer intelligence, his anointing. And he's doing what a lot of people are not doing. He's making change. I speak none other than Pastor Emmanuel Blanchard. He is an educator, an entrepreneur, he's a community leader, he's a writer, a musician, just multi-talented, multi-gifted, and an individual that's not afraid to explore the full range of his gifts, his talents, and his ability. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Trim. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be with you here. And I'm so excited for End Your Year Strong. Thank you again for having me. It's such a wonderful experience being here with you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
again.
Well, thank you for always saying yes. And
Of
he
course.
happens to be one of my proteges as well. So I'm really, really proud of that. I get to do life with him in real time and to create an environment really to support his rise and his exploration of potential. And so there's a lot that I could say about you. I just did the brief overview. We're going to have some serious times and then we're going to have some fun times with you as those that are viewing get to know who this amazing individual is. But from your perspective, who is Emmanuel Blanchard?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I am Emmanuel Blanchard. Emmanuel Blanchard Jr. is the son of West Indian immigrants who sacrificed everything, who sacrificed family, who sacrificed comfortability to come to this country and really pour into their four children. And I'm the last of four kids whose parents came from the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere and who only saw the way to ascend through social class, through oppression, through education. And so being the son of immigrants and realizing the American dream and realizing the American struggle, it offered me an opportunity to learn a lot about community, to learn about a lot about history, to learn about what are the systems that oppress people. And so I've been fortunate in my life to become an educator, to become a minister, and to really try to give back to my community on a micro level as well as a macro level. So who am I? I'm someone who realized that many of the chains that bring us to the kingdom, many of the chains that bring us into our churches, our local churches, are often rooted in education gaps, whether it be financial gaps in terms of understanding wealth and wealth and management, financial management, understanding the healthcare disparity that's often rooted in educational disparity. Also understanding that there's a public school to prison pipeline. So I'm someone who was fortunate enough to avoid all of those pitfalls, but then also becoming the kind of person who can start to identify the root causes of so many of our social ills. And one of the many issues that brings us to our faith and to the kingdom. And that's really what I try to do, is to uncover and to really expose these things and provide real pragmatic solutions to these things.
Wow, wow. That's really, really good. Is that one of the reasons why you started your business and empowerment, that it's the Blanchard Education and Empowerment
Yes.
institution? Is that one of the reasons why you started it?
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that I noticed, I'm also the son of a minister. I'm a pastor. I'm a PK, and all of those years going to church and coming to Sunday night service, Sunday morning service, Wednesday night service, Tuesday night Bible study, Friday night service, choir rehearsal. One of the things that I started to notice was this question of when do we begin to get to that point of actually achieving the prayers? When do we actually get to the point of agency and actually addressing some of the fundamental questions and concerns that we have? And so when I got to this chance to really get into ministry, I wanted people to actually be able not only to pray for their problems, but to point to their specific problems and say, I'm going to do this to address this root systematic issue. So for me, building and starting this business, starting this industry, being an advocate, being a consultant was really trying to address systematic oppression within the field of education as much as possible because it's so symptomatic of so many of the social ills that we have. So absolutely, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to start the business and had to.
Yeah, yeah. Tell us a little bit more about your journey and what inspired you to become an educator and a community leader, especially in the context of your parents' influence.
Oh, well, one of the things that I'll never forget is, my parents, particularly my father, he would drop all of us off to school and he would say, and he would give us stories about what it was like back home, the fact that there was no free public education system, and that there were days that my parents missed going to school because they could not afford to go to school. And they would remind us constantly that there are certain things for which you should never take for granted. They reminded us that the idea of going to school, the idea of having a profession, the idea of being able to own a home, the idea of having access to free, clean drinking water, that should be something you should never take for granted. And so, when you hear the term education, education, education every single day, you start to realize, wow, there might be something to this. And I was fortunate enough in my own education career to meet some wonderful people, some wonderful mentors, some wonderful, thoughtful people who were change makers. And I started to realize there are those who are able to affect change through government. There are those who are able to affect change through culture. But it's very rare to have people like myself, people who look like me, affect change in the school buildings. And so for me, I started to notice every time I showed up into a space as a man of color, as a Black man, and to speak and to present myself in a certain way, that
Mhm.
affected change in a way that can occur on the ground level and also a macro level. So education just became a passion of mine. It became I want to be a Renaissance man. I want to be along the lines of Paul Robeson. And I want to show up in a room and you don't know what to expect because it's not just being the educator, it's also being the educated as well. That's really important to me.
Yeah, the learn are learners.
Absolutely.
And if you don't know, you learn. If you do know, you teach. And I
Exactly.
can't remember who said that each one reach one, each one teach one.
Hmm.
Can't remember the exact quote, but it's true that if you are going to educate, you yourself must be educated. Could you share some of the key insights of realizing from your nearly 20 years of work in the public school or public education that led you to focus on addressing educational disparities and inequalities?
I have a number of experiences where you start to see it. As a minister, you get to see the effect of it. You get to see the effect of disparity. You get to see the effect of disparity when you have families who come and they have no understanding of the legal system. That is a richness, that is a wealth that is afforded to a few. But when you need someone, for example, to engage in asset law, estate law rather, when you need someone to help you in terms of dealing with banks, when you need someone to help you deal with down to even basic medical advice, because there are certain groups that are underrepresented. You start to really understand, well, how can I can pray for you? I want to pray for you. I want you to feel a sense of comfort, but I also want to avoid this being the fate of another generation.
Mhm.
I don't want mothers who struggle with healthcare disparities to produce children who are also going to suffer with healthcare disparities because they're underrepresented. So, how do you actually begin to address those issues? Is well, you have to tackle it at its root. You have to tackle it in schools. You have to tackle it and say, hey, we need children to enter into particular fields. We need to engage a certain creativity. And the only way you do that, you can do it from a pulpit, which I do, but you also have to do it from a classroom. You have to do it from a mentorship program. Because again, you start to understand that systematic issues have multiple causes. And for me, I just noticed that whether it be issues of the justice system, the environmental systems, there are just so many of the systems that we can just go through, and I can start to tie little threads to how it goes back to the classroom. But it's important that we are in those spaces. And you've said this a million times, the kingdom is so large, it's not just on the pulpit. The pulpit can be in the classroom. The pulpit is in the boardroom. The pulpit is in a governmental office. And so my pulpit is both on a traditional pulpit as well as in a classroom. And it's really about addressing those systematic concerns that people have, but within the scope of a classroom.
Yeah. Jesus said something, go into all the world and preach the gospel. What is the gospel that you carry into all the world? What does that look like? What does that feel like? And give me a definition of what kingdom means and is to you.
It's a gospel of love, humanity, respect,
Mhm.
sincerity. I think one of the, everyone knows well, I hope everyone knows what love is, but one of the things that I aspire to really engage in terms of ministry, whether it be traditional ministry in a church building or in a school, is this idea of sincerity. I think that one of the concerns we often have is that we question the sincerity of the individuals with which we encounter or with which we deal. The idea of, can I really take you for what you're saying? Is what you're saying for my good, or is it for my detriment? And that's the thing that I love about Christ, is that Christ is always at the very heart of everything he did. There's a sincerity. Whether he
Mhm.
was dealing with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, you see that contrast. People who are in the religious sphere, but there's a tendency for it to not be sincere for the greater good of people, not for it being the greater good of a society. But Christ is always for our good. And so when I'm in a school, when I'm in a classroom, when I'm dealing with boards of ed, when I'm dealing with fellow teachers, when I'm dealing with fellow educators, when I'm dealing with students, when I'm dealing with parents, it's about, what can I do to make you a better you? Because I know you're going to be ministering to other people. Are you ministering them in a sincere manner? Or are you ministering with them in a disingenuous manner where you're taking advantage of them, exploiting them, and perpetuating a cycle of, whether it be physical violence or emotional violence, economic violence? To engage that is not to be a sincere person of faith. And so for me, the gospel is really about a sincerity of truth, a sincerity of love, a sincerity of equity, a sincerity where I can look at you and you can look at me and say, I know you are standing for my good.
Yeah, yeah, that's really, really good. It brings me back to a question someone asked me about our humanity and microaggression. And I said to them, the greatest microaggression is not what people do to you, is what you do to yourself. And
Mm,
that is to ignore the greatness within, the
mm,
significance within, the relevance within. And you talked about various stakeholders that you actually work with, you bring together for a more equitable educational system. So, what roles do they play in this process? All the stakeholders holders you talked about.
Whatever system we talk about, and Dr. Trim, you've spoken a lot about your experience in government. There are often these systems where we're a part of them, but we don't necessarily understand what role each individual plays within the system.
Mhm.
Um, Many people have, gone through a school, but you may not necessarily know who the cooks are
Mm.
that shape the school, that make decisions. Like, for example, who gets hired, who gets fired, what are the topics taught in school, how much access do people have to information, what are the budgets? That's a very important conversation. Who decides the budgets? Who decides where money is allocated? One of the things that I try to do is, you start to leverage the political capital that you have, and you start to begin to create an atmosphere where you develop more transparency. Um, a lack of transparency works for those who are in power. And so, if you have that lack of transparency, there's usually a group that are oppressed, that suffer because of that lack of transparency, and it works for the benefit of those. My
Mhm.
job is to raise critical questions. My job is to show up into the room and to represent the people who are often underrepresented or never represented, and to ask difficult questions. My job is to start to create that air of transparency. My
Mm.
job is to speak. Now, here's the other piece, which is often very important. In those institutions, in those structures, you need people who speak the language of the institution, who speak the language of the structure, who know what words are the power words, who knows what phrases are the power phrases.
Mm.
And in education, that exists as well. And oftentimes, the people who go through the system, there's a huge percentage of those who go through the system who don't know the language of power, who don't know the structures of power, who don't know where the wheels are grinding and how it's moving, and it benefits a few. So my job is to really one, create transparency, two, to create accountability. Oftentimes that includes just showing up and being at meetings and sitting and having conversations with the people who make these decisions, and to remind them, hey, you have a person here and they need to be represented in this meeting as well. They need to be represented in this decision as well. You have to be accountable to them as well. So a lot of it is really done on the individual level. But a lot of it also too is done in the, I'm just going to show up and I'm going to sit sometimes in the back and I'm going to watch the conversation. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's not what you say, sometimes it's just you being in the room, and to make sure that you are creating an atmosphere of truth. So it can happen a number of different ways.
Yeah. How much mental and spiritual agility do you need to navigate this terrain that you're talking about?
Oh, so so much, so much, so much. It's a. I truly believe that when we engage in the natural world, you're engaging so many other realms as possible, as many realms as possible too. Um, you have to be able to decode and uncode and unpack the spirit that people come into a room with. In politics, they talk about logic and rhetoric and political science. That there's a game that's being played, and as a man of faith, as a man who believes in Christ, while I'm also unpacking people's political science. I'm unpacking their tools, their political tools. I also have to unpack their spirit,
Hmm.
because when you start to unpack their spirit, you start to unpack different elements or different aspects of them that might, for example, be exhibiting hurt. For example, if you consider some of people's insecurities, they manifest themselves in their political actions. So
Hmm.
are you going to oppress a group because you yourself at one point felt oppressed? You yourself at one point felt hurt. And you're just manifesting some of these ideas later on, and you're manifesting it now because you have political power. It takes so much, it takes so much spiritual strength to engage this realm.
Hmm. Hmm.
One of the things I know, that whenever I go, my process before I enter the pulpit, and my process before I enter my classrooms and these meetings, I need to charge myself spiritually,
Hmm.
because I'm being asked to operate differently.
Hmm.
I'm being asked to see things differently, to not just hear the words that people are speaking, but to hear the spirit that actually pushes those words out. And
Hmm.
so it does require a lot of spiritual dexterity. It requires a lot of spiritual agility. And but it's an important reason why, like, and you say this all the time, we need kingdom leaders in so many of these different spaces, because you'll be able to operate on another level than many of your peers and your colleagues.
Hmm. You're talking about spiritual acuity as well, being able to hear and see what others don't hear and see. There's a scripture that comes to mind from out of the book of Daniel, so apt
Mhm.
in application when it comes to understanding what you just unpacked. Daniel had to have the ability to hear from two realms, the natural and the spiritual, and then to pull down immediately the solutions to
Yeah.
navigate the psychological terrain of individuals who are driven by a different philosophy, a different life philosophy, political philosophy, historical as well as cultural. And there's so many influences and so many forces that are at play when you enter any kind of space. And this is for those of you that are professional. It's not one size fit all. Life is very, very dynamic. It changes on a dime. And we have to have that dexterity, like you said, the agility, like you said, and the acuity. Those are three words that come to my mind right now. And so, when I think about you and what God has given you to do, even the Blanchard Education and Empowerment organization that you have started, and I know that you are particularly proud of it. We live by stories. That's what culture does. Tells us stories, and we tell ourselves stories, and we learn from it. And from there, we extrapolate what the Bible called precept, precept upon precepts. And these are guiding principles. They're like um, GPSs or even a compass that we use for our own personal lives, whether it is conscious or unconscious. And there's a quote, unless you make the unconscious conscious, the unconscious will continue to influence your destiny. And you will believe that this is fate. This is your fate. This is how you show up. God must have wanted this to happen to me. Or the opposite happens. You feel as if you have no control over your own destiny. Can you give us one or two stories of a project that Blanchard Education and Empowerment Organization that influenced how people thought and how people showed up, and how people can actually take their personal power back and stand up with a sense of self-efficacy? And I know that's a long, big question, but give us some stories of success.
I'll give you a couple of stories. So the first would be that I had, without naming any names, because obviously they're confidentiality measures, but I had a student who had an experience where they faced, they were harassed ostensibly. And this was, I had never actually taught this student before. And we needed to be able to address a microaggression, a series of microaggressions, in an institution that did not want to hear it, did not want to entertain it, did not want to admit what it actually was dealing with. And it was the fact that this student, the student of color, was facing this experience where they did not want to, have to deal with the reality of, I am not accepted in this space. I am not accepted in this place. What we did is we decided, listen, you are not only acceptable, but you are exceptional. So
Mhm.
let's get to work. So you have the political, you have the legal right to an education. What are the mechanisms? Your folks are taxpayers. They are taxpayers. You deserve an education. Let us exercise every single legal right you have. So what does that look like? We're going on a letter campaign writing. We're going on a letter writing campaign. We're going to organize a political action. We're going to actually take over Board of Ed meetings. We're actually going to start running candidates for boards of education. And what we started to see as we started working on this, not only did we engage this child who at one moment felt on the margin, who felt ostracized, who felt like, I don't have a place here. No, we're going to flip that. You now feel empowered because you are empowered. You were chosen to be special. You had this moment. You were chosen to experience this horrific experience because it was going to make you better, and it was also going to make others around you better. You have now started to understand, wait, this was just a temporary thing. I'm now going into politics. And this is where this individual is now. And to see how we were able to turn that into an actionable item, this moment where others might have just said, let me just get through this experience. I don't want to be here. Maybe I'll transfer schools. No, you start to create and put a stake in the ground. You plant your flag in the ground and say, I'm important. I'm exceptional. I'm going to be greater than this moment. And so we were able to coordinate. We were able to make this into such an actionable item where all of a sudden, every single political entity within the school body had to organize and had to actually address the fundamental issue at play. So that's just one example. I'll use another example. One of my visions, and I'm even doing this with my own local church, is to transform um, primary and secondary school Christian education. There are so many ways in which the old model that I grew up with, the old Sunday school model, it needs a little bit of tinkering. And so one of the things that we're doing is we have been forming coalitions and partnerships with the local community, forming coalitions with local businesses, creating internships with the local community, within the local community, so that any child that goes into our local church, and we're starting to expand this program out to other neighboring churches because we've designed the package. We're now going to be ready to ship this off, and we've done the blueprint. We'll show you how to do it at your local church. You want to make the church the epicenter of the community. And for a long time, what I started realizing is that there was a chasm between young Christians and understanding the relevance of what the church should have meant for them. By making the church the epicenter of all political activity, all economic activity, all cultural activity, you start to give them this idea of the church is never irrelevant. The church is always relevant because the church has a relationship with your local supermarket. It has a relationship with your local staples. It has a relationship with the local restaurants. And so when it comes time for you needing an internship program, when it comes time for you needing your first job, the church is the thing that's allocating those positions. It's already done the work. It's already established the relationships. And this is something that all of a sudden you realize I'm not only working to learn something, but this was rooted in my local church. This was rooted and the education was there. And so this is kind of the next phase of what we're doing. We're doing it locally with individuals. We're doing it in terms of churches, in terms of recreating these programs, making the educational experience within the churches meaningful, but also empowering. And the last thing that I'll suggest too, that we're also doing is, I have the ability to connect to some really, really cool people. And it's this idea of ensuring that whomever has come through my school experiences and my church experiences, that they have opportunities to create programs that will benefit the local community as well. So I
That
live,
is incredible.
yeah.
I am listening to you. My heart is leaping because we have an opportunity for those of you that are tuning in to hear more from Pastor Blanchard, educator, community activist, and one who is currently addressing educational disparities and inequalities within our communities. And anyone that is listening, whether you're a pastor, whether you're an educator, whether you're a professional in the marketplace, and you know that God is calling you to make a difference, I'm telling you, you need to be at End Your Year Strong. And the information is there on the screen, endyouryearstrong.com, and you can register right now to be a part of this. And this is only one aspect of us really empowering individuals so that they can navigate this new normal. We can move beyond the reset and we can see the world being a better place. And I want the world to be a better place because I have selfish motives. I live in it. And beyond me living in it, I have people that I love that live in it, future generations that I'm concerned about. And I'm happy to be partnering with you at this level to bring solutions to problems. I see you as not only a person that is bringing solutions, I see you as the solution. So I'm calling you a solutionist. What advice would you give to individuals who are passionate about education, becoming an educator, or addressing educational disparities and inequities within the community?
The first thing I would say is identify what the problems are, and they're always multi-pronged. And identify 1 to 2 particular issues that you see as being fundamental to your cause, fundamental to your passion. Do not try to change every single thing, but choose a couple of things because we all have something in particular God has gifted us to address. God has given us to speak specifically towards, and then get to work. And the other thing I would say is get an amazing mentor. I have one. She is phenomenal. And here's the reason why you do need a mentor. The work can be very laborious. It can be very difficult. It can be very taxing. The right mentor, and I'm not just saying this because it's Dr. Trim, but it is Dr. Trim, and she's here and she's always been available. The right mentor is inspiring. The right person will inspire you. And all of a sudden, they'll give you the language, they'll give you the inspiration, and they'll then give you the inclination to begin the work. And once you're doing the work, you will find like-minded people who will partner with you, who will help you to do their part, and they'll help you to do your part. And the work that you build together will be amazing. So find the problem, be a solution, find someone to mentor you like I have. And I'm telling you, it'll be rewarding and you will see effective change.
Thank you so much. You are a family man. And you mentioned that you're the son of immigrants to immigrants,
Yes.
and you are the proud uncle of six amazing human beings.
Yes, ma'am.
How has your personal life and family influenced your work, your commitment within the community to create a better future through education and empowerment?
It's amazing to see how quickly time goes. I remember, all of these kids just being tiny little babies, and then all of a sudden, some of these guys are bigger than I am. I get to see my nieces, and it you start to realize that my work has to be purposeful. I have young men and young women who are my blood, who walk the streets, and it is my responsibility to ensure that the streets that they walk are better.
Mm,
I'm driven every single day to ensure, God hasn't given me any yet, but it's my life's work to ensure that I leave a world better for them,
mm.
because I love them so much, and I do love family, so it's incredibly important. And like you said before, we share this world. It's our job to make it better for the people we love.
Yes. I love this conversation. I think there's some fun facts that people need to know about you because you're a genius. You're
Oh,
an intellect. You're a philosopher, and this
thank
is
you.
from my mouth
Mhm.
to your ears. But here's some fun facts, and I want you to just talk to me about it. You have
Okay.
written and produced your own music. So
Yeah.
you got music and music production in your
Yes, ma'am.
back pocket.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Talk to me about your love for music.
I don't think we've ever even talked about this, like even offline, but uh, I was raised, again, raised in a West Indian household. So
Mhm.
music is everywhere. Son of a minister. So music is everywhere. At least 5 or 6 different church services per week. So, so I grew up playing music. The first time I played the piano was, I played the piano, I played the organ. The first time I played the piano, I think was at the age of 5. And because of that, my parents sent me off to music school, and it was music lessons all the time. So there was a point in my life where I was taking music lessons 3 days a week. So I would go from school to music lessons, piano, classical lessons, jazz lessons, music theory. And so for the better part of my life, that was a serious, serious, amazing passion of mine. It has been amazing, rewarding. Um, I've had the pleasure of playing for a number of different talented people. This was all before I was called into ministry. But every now and again, you can catch me on an organ. But it's yes, I love music. Absolutely love music.
I'm a lover of music too. I tell everybody, look, I studied music in college, and I still can't play a lick. So it is, it is a passion without potential. So I don't
Mm.
have the potential to be a great musician, but I do have a passion for music. If you could pick one musical genre to listen to for the rest of your life, what would that be and
Oh,
why?
wow, wow. I'm gonna get into trouble. I'm gonna get into trouble. So here's the struggle that I have. I'm gonna say gospel, but I also want to say jazz.
You mean
Uh,
to say jazz?
so I'm gonna say jazz. I'm
Yeah.
gonna say jazz. The and here's why, because there's so many singers, contemporary artists in the gospel music genre who they have clearly been studying lots and lots of jazz. The importance of jazz historically is undeniable. When I was growing up, one of the musicians I first learned of was Charlie Parker, and just the virtuosity of people like Tatum and Parker and Miles Davis. And it's just there are just so many different names I could cite. Chick Corea. I mean, if you listen to a number of your favorite gospel artists now, a number of your favorite musicians now, they have all been studying within the past 10, 15 years Chick Corea and his genius. So I will say jazz. For
Yeah.
those of you who are watching who are part of my church, it's also a gospel, but absolutely.
Yeah. And I think, with Christians, we're afraid of saying this is the genre.
Hmm.
We're not talking about a specific individual here because music is given by God,
Hmm.
period. But the genres, we never sit down and say, okay, this genre does something to me. David had to use a genre to drive the demons out and
Mm,
the spirits that were tormenting Saul. So there had to be a frequency was he was playing in, a chord progression. We don't think about chord progressions and how they play a major role, and then his interpretation of a sound, how he reps his skill around a note and what that note meant and how he interpreted it, but also how the spirit of
mm,
Saul interpreted it. And he played at such a frequency that even demons moved out of his vicinity.
absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
you're drawing to you through music things and people because of the frequency that you're playing at. And I love all kinds of music. I think if I had, what would your second be before I give you my two?
Oof. My second would be hmm,
Second and
I
third.
second
Second,
and third. Okay. So
second and
jazz so jazz would definitely be one.
third. Hmm.
Um, I'm going to be very specific here. 70s R&B. So like
Hmm.
the time period of a Stevie Wonder.
Hmm.
Um, it there's just something about, for example, songs in the key of life that
Hmm.
it is a very unique moment in time. It's just amazing. Um, and I'm going to say classical would be my third.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, I'm going to park that aside. I'm going to
Hmm.
remember to give you my three. But how can a musician, you're talking about the 70s. So in the 70s, they were interpreting the time that they were living in, and they were creating a sound commensurate to the needs within the world. And it hit a chord, a universal chord that gave us hope, that uplifted us during some of the most challenging moments in history within our generation. How can musicians today and songwriters and creatives
Hmm.
interpret our time in such a way and pull down out of the realm of the spirit a sound
Wow.
that
Wow.
affects us at the level of our humanity?
Oof.
And I'm asking that question while you're finding the answer because I'm in prayer just about every day, asking God, give me the sound, give me the gift of a storyteller.
Hmm.
Because we change cultures and we change environments and we change mindsets and psychology through the gift of storytelling. That's why
Yes.
that's why you have Hollywood. Hollywood is gifted to tell stories. And I would like God to raise up the Renaissance man and the Renaissance woman with that creative gift, not just to write songs and to tell stories, but paint
Hmm.
and build buildings, that creative ability, because God used someone like Basilea. He was an architect
Yeah.
and he built an architectural wonder in his day. The same thing as Solomon. And this is all a part of creativity, filming, podcasting, all of those things. What kind of discipline and mindset should we have in approaching our creative, natural abilities that make us godlike?
Wow. Wow. That is such a profound question. I've been spending some time wrestling with that question. One of the things that I really want to promote is this idea of encouraging young people to get into the arts. It's a passion of mine.
And you
Um,
know you're aging when you say young people.
have I crossed the threshold?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You officially crossed the threshold when you say young people. I tell my friends never say young people
No,
because
okay,
you
I'm not.
repeat
So,
yourself.
so people like myself. I think one of the things that you have to, one of the things to which you have to commit is the study of the arts,
Hmm.
as well as the willingness and the courage to study to the point where you're then willing to break some of the forms.
Hmm.
There's an issue that we have in the arts where there's a replicability problem, where
Hmm.
many artists want to recreate something that already exists,
Yeah.
and it's because it's driven by profitability.
Hmm.
If I create the same thing as someone else, I know it will be successful because it's already proven to be successful. The issue with that, though, in the art is then it just becomes nothing but a derivative. It's nothing more than just a copycat. It's not adding anything. It's not saying anything new. And I think that's one of the struggles we have in the arts is, are we driven more by profitability, or are we driven by this human need to express? And that's the root struggle. The more you study, the more you start to realize that the idea, the classics, the things that transcend time and space and moment, are the things where people were struggling to express something. And that's what the arts are able to do, is they're able to express things that, an essay may not, essays are part of the arts, but that words might struggle to say, that you have to connect harmony and rhythm, or you have to go to the visual medium. And I do think that that's the internal struggle, is that we have a lot of artists now who are less willing to have the courage to be different. We have a lot who are into shock value, but not necessarily real value in terms of expressing the human expression. So I would say first study. There has to be more study. There has to be more study, and there has to be willingness to say, what is it that I fundamentally want to say about the human condition and the human experience?
Hmm. You talked about breaking the form, and to me, that speaks of innovation
Hmm.
versus duplication.
Hmm.
Because, I'm in the authorship space. And one of the things the publishers do, they have what is called a derivative. So there's no uniqueness in perspective. They just extrapolate what made that book successful, and they try to recreate the success of old material. So
Hmm.
you're not pushing to the next. You're not breaking through the familiar. What you're doing, you're staying in the familiar, the status quo. And familiarity and status quo is where your dreams and your visions go to die.
Wow.
So you can't keep, not you, but I'm encouraging those of you that are in any creative space, whether it's education or the performing arts or the podcasting, whatever you're doing out there to create makeup, here. St- my instruction is stop trying to recreate the success of a previous season or of someone else, rather than expressing your uniqueness at this season in this stage of your life. It means that you have to be a part of the evolutionary process. The world is evolving. So, who is the next best version of yourself? And every year you get introduced to that person. So, there's the 12.0, the 13.0, the 22.0 version of yourself. Every year, you turn 24, then you turn 25 and 26. You get that 1 year to explore all the abilities and gifts and talents that go along with that season, as well as that stage, as well as that age. But when you turn your next birthday, you have to have the courage and the vision to push to the next best version of yourself. And it's an evolutionary process. And I think that's one of the reasons why I continue to push people to write a 20-year plan for their lives. Where can you get that? In And two of the books, one is Hello Tomorrow, and the other one is Unstoppable. You should get both of the books. But those of you that have tuned in, again, I'm going to strongly recommend that you do register for andrewyourstrong.com, because these are some of the things that we're going to unpack. So just a few more questions, and these are fun questions. Um, uh, what can I ask? If you could have a superpower, just one superpower, what superpower would you want to have? And how would you use it to make your everyday life more enjoyable and exciting?
Teleportation.
Hmm.
I know you know about that one. Uh, there's a point that you hit. I think I'll speak for myself, where there's so much you want to do, you become so inspired. There's so many fields and things that you'd like to explore and try and say, I want to do this, I want to do this. And your heart starts to bubble over because of the excitement and knowing that you can do it, but you have to be here, you have to be here, you have to be here, you have to be here. And then you get stuck in traffic and it's like, oh man, I'm wasting away here. I wish I could be at these different locations in an instant. So for me, my superpower would be teleportation, where I could be somewhere instantaneously so I can pour myself into something and then I have enough time to make it to the next thing. So
I like
teleportation.
I like that. I'm trying to borrow people's time that they're wasting. You know, I
Mm,
asked a friend of my time, if you're not using two of your 24 hours a day, can I borrow those 20, those 2 hours?
yeah.
Because people do waste their time, but that's really, really cool. Everyone has a favorite movie that they can watch over and over again. What's your all-time favorite movie? And
Coming to
what
America.
is so special?
Uh, coming to America. I'm sorry to cut you off. Coming to America. Um, it's just hilarious. All of my friends and I, we just go quote for quote for quote. I'm a New Yorker, if you can tell from my accent, and so there's just something about classic New York, Eddie Murphy, Queens, the immigrant experience. So much of my life has been shaped by the immigrant experience. Although I was born here in the States, but having parents and just being so proudly West Indian. Um, all I think that many immigrants find a little bit of themselves in that film, although there's like a lot of comedy in there. There's a few grains of truth. The struggle between adopting your American self, but also trying to preserve a bit of home. So there's a little bit of that truth there, and just a lot of fun there. So it's always coming to America. It's just this every time I see it, I just watch it. It's very funny.
Sometimes it's the little things that bring us joy.
Yeah.
Can you share with us a small everyday ritual or habit that makes you happy or keeps you grounded?
Wow. One of the things that makes me very, very happy is I just getting text messages from my parents. They really mean the world to me. You know, and one of the amazing things is I'm at the stage of my life where I've gotten the chance to see them grow older, and the relationship has changed, and I'm not taking for granted now, the text messages. I'm not taking for granted now the voice calls, because as a person who loves history, there is so much history that we get downloaded from our parents, and there's a point that we hit where you don't get the same messages, but you still need to understand and reveal the encoding of who and what you are. And so those, I'm proud of you, those, I love you dad, I love you mom, those mean the world to me.
That's so great. You mentioned the word history, and I always love the study of history for many reasons, but the biggest reason is that history explains the present,
Absolutely.
how we get where we are, and why we are living like we live at this stage and of our human experience here on Earth. But talking about historical figures, if you had the ability to exchange your life, just switch your life with an historical figure for one day, what historical figure would you exchange your life with for that day, and why?
Ooh, ooh, Dr. Trim, you got me on that one. Um, I'm stuck between two.
Okay.
Am I allowed?
Yes.
Okay. The first person would be Napoleon.
Mm.
First person I would be with the first person I would exchange with would be Napoleon, simply because he represents that quintessential breaking of form, historical form,
Mhm.
but able to capture a moment in time where he becomes a military supernova, a genius, and is able to rally an entire nation around him. Um, but he has a moment that leads to his utter downfall.
Mhm.
So I would want to have a conversation with him about how did you get to this point of having an entire continental empire, and just because of arrogance or hubris, what made you make the mistake of thinking you can have more?
Mm.
I would also want to ask him, at what point would it have been enough? Was there an end point in mind? So Napoleon would be my first person, and the second person would be Dr. King.
Mm.
And the reason why it would be Dr. King is because there's also something that's fascinating about the human psyche when it comes to, from everything I've read about Dr. King, he was well aware of his what his fate was likely going to be. Um, and for me, my question would be, how do you persist knowing what the end is likely going to be? How do you persist when you have children, you have a wife, you have people who love you, but yet and still you're driven every single day to deal with the enormity of being a change agent?
Mhm.
Um, if there's anyone who could speak to this idea of trying to change systems and to reimagine systems and to do it under the most extreme of circumstances, it would be Dr. King. Um, and to have to encourage people to do the same. How do you encourage people to do the same when you know what your end is going to be? And it's going to be at the very face of the thing that you're fighting. To me, he would have to be part of that conversation.
Mm. Wow. That's amazing. Talking to you, I could talk for hours and lose track of time. Because
Thank you, Dr. Trump.
you make so much sense. Again, we are having Pastor Emmanuel Blanchard as one of our presenters. We're always happy to have him as a part of our team that has been brought together by God, really to empower you wherever you are, to give you the way forward, to give you prophetic insight, apostolic perspective, to extrapolate out of the Bible principles and patterns that you can use and apply to your life so that you can do something great in this world. Those that do know their God shall be strong and do great exploits. Um, Emmanuel, where can
Yes, ma'am.
people find you? How can they connect with you?
I am available on all socials, Instagram, EJ underscore Blanchard, Facebook, EJ underscore Blanchard, Twitter, EJR Blanchard, LinkedIn the same. And, again, if you want to support the work that we're doing with regards to fighting systemic oppression in education, I'm telling you, this is such important work. It's some of the things that drive us to have spiritual crises. What we're trying to do is to break you free on the opposite end so that you can then be a blessing to someone else. And so our job is to really shatter systemic oppressions in educational models and educational systems so that you can find some freedom and liberty so that there can be the end of financial disparities, the end of medical disadvantages. And so you can find me on all socials on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So Dr. Trim, thank you so much
You're
again for
so
having me.
welcome. 2024 is going to be a great year, and I would love to have you back to continue to unpack this and to empower all stakeholders, those that are involved, because I think there are two institutions that definitely hold the key to sustainability of our society and our cultures so that we can hand this world to the next generation. And that would be the educational system and definitely our churches. And you represent both, amongst other things, community building, amongst many other things that you are doing. I want to say thank you once again for coming. And I look forward to continuing our conversation. Those of you that are just tuning in, this is Emmanuel Blanchard. He gave the information that you need to connect with him, but he will be with us December the 14th to the 16th, two very important days, or three very important days. Your life will be revolutionized. And this is ending your year strong, because how you end a year determines how you start a new year. And just because you have gone through many things this year, it doesn't mean that you cannot end your year strong, so that your next year does not have to be a duplication of this year. God bless you all. Thank you for tuning in. EndYourStrong.com.